Today's the third day of this November 1984 7-day retreat. At first there's an announcement. It is a request by Jeff, who is the caretaker of this camp and who is a hunter. He requests that people do not walk in the woods other than on the paths or near the creek bed, as had been announced in the opening evening talk. There have been people who have been in other places than those, and this disturbs his activity. So let me say again, stay near the creeks or on the paths. The creek bed comes to one waterfall and then to another, but we're not even sure if the second waterfall is within the property of this camp, but the boundary line is somewhere around there. Beyond that, you are trespassing on other people's land. Jeff mentioned it because of people have been walking through the woods. As he put it, one deer has already been lost to him. We mentioned to him that the people's attitude here, and he requested that as he respects our feelings, that we respect his. There are dirt roads up the hill which go through fields and in many different areas. People wish to take longer walks than along the creek bed up to the second waterfall. And hopefully next fall we'll have a different kind of woodland to walk in. But there are hunters there too, but at least as far as the 280 acres go, we're free to walk the woods there. We'll use a koan today to talk about all kinds of things, taking off from a koan, from the Mumonkan koan, which is entitled Seizei, a Poor Monk. And the koan, as written here in Shibayama's Mumonkan, comments on the Mumonkan, reads, "A monk once said to Master Sozan, 'I'm poor and destitute. I beg you, O Master, please help me and make me rich.'" Maybe we can end the whole thing right here. You seem to understand. Sozan said, "Venerable Seizei." "Yes, Master," replied Seizei. And Sozan remarked, "Having tasted 3 cups of the best wine, you still say that your lips are not yet moistened?" This koan is a shortened document of a Dharma duel of the kind that took place in ancient China between people who were working on themselves. This was one aspect of their learning. Maybe one had a penetrating insight and understanding of no division or one mind. And then one went to different monks or teachers or hermits, whoever, to, as it is called, test out this understanding. Which, if we look at it in ways that are accessible, is to see where one stands in maybe questioning, approaching a famous master, asking him something and being asked back, or whatever he chooses to do, or doesn't choose to do, just does. Where is one then? Is there already image of the master? If there is a very frightening image of the master, one won't even go. Or one may go anyways and see whether something holds up. If one has an image of oneself as very enlightened, there may be a certain arrogance which may be cut down. One may not even be aware of it. It's a real possibility for bringing things to light about oneself and oneself in relationship. Also, people went to seek out each other in order to test the other. It was a meeting of minds, or a testing, whether there could be or was a meeting of minds or no minds. Meaning no minds of me and my accomplishments or my ambitions, or if that was not consciously there, it would very likely be shown up. So here this monk who calls himself poor and destitute begs the master, please help me, make me rich. It's not every translation makes me rich. This is the first time I read that here. But it's okay. In working on a koan, you must sort of enter into these two characters. Which is not different from entering into each other's skins or shells, as it were, when one relates with each other. If one really wants to relate, one has to feel how the other person feels, or else there will be misunderstanding or hurt, tension, or just chitter-chatter with no substance or depth to it. So Seizei says, I'm poor and destitute, please help me. What happens to one? Somebody comes to one and says, I'm really in a terrible way. I have all kinds of problems. Please help me. Maybe we shouldn't go so far away from what he says. He says, I'm poor and destitute. Please help me. Is one immediately swept up in one's always someplace existing missionary spirit to help? The do-gooder in us. If that's triggered, one can't listen to this man. One can't really look. One has already a field of operation. One is flattered. This person comes to me. That's nice. One is somebody. One is a helper. He's made me into something. Now I can function, and that is satisfying and fulfilling. I don't have to face these gaping holes in my life. I'm exaggerating, but there is some truth in this. How does one respond? How does one feel? What is the first reaction when somebody comes and says, please help me? And every one of us is asked this question at one time or another, or many times. To be so careful. Carefully, it means attentive. Not just throwing oneself into the help, onto the other, but seeing what goes on in oneself, because that determines how one will relate to this other person, whether one needs to get something out of it for oneself, whether one needs to become somebody in the process. And if one needs to become somebody, one needs to have a result, so one will exert some kind of a pressure on this person to shape up or to show a result. Because I need that for this whole process of being a helper. It's no good to be a helper with no results. All of this to be watched with tender care in oneself and others, in the ones who come to one. What is really going on in this person who is asking for help? Not to jump to an immediate conclusion, which we're so prone to do with everything. When somebody asks one something, can one leave oneself and the other person lots of space before the answer comes? The person may be impatient for an answer, but an answer doesn't come quickly unless it's a pat answer. And that's never what's called for. It may be what's called for if it's just a pat question. So Sozan here, who is being asked, is there with this man. He's not entering into this helper image that is offered to him. He leaves that alone. Doesn't enter into the trap. He just calls out to him, "Hey, Seizei," or he says, "Venerable Seizei." Apparently the person was, I've read that someplace, was a teacher himself. "Seizei, yes?" Like that. No barrier, nothing in between them. The question and the answer are not two, one can say. Now, one can train oneself to give such answers when one is asked by a Zen teacher. And this training, I've heard, goes on. To be sure, when somebody asks you to say yes immediately, "Yes, sir," and if one is an innocent visitor, one may be amazed at the present mindedness of the people who immediately say yes when asked something. And it can be pure training. So not to be deceived. When one is very impressed with something, to hold back and look and question. I don't mean cynically or sarcastically, but openly, innocently. Not be so gullible, because human beings can train each other and themselves into almost anything, into being there in a spacesuit in the tiniest little capsule for months on end. It's unfathomable. And then this feeling, I've been in outer space. Never was one so confined before in one's life. Because what space does one see? One has these little holes to look. I haven't been there, but the pictures that come down are very blurred. And the suit costs over $1 million, one of those suits there. And even when you're outside, they're staggering around. On the lifeline. What can you see through this enormous helmet? If you were to experience space as it is, you'd die. You'd have to die. How did we get there? What we can train ourselves to put up with or to do, how to function. These people who had these interviews or question and answer, they hadn't already read 900 years of Koan books before. We have. So we can, with some intelligence and facility, sort of fathom right answers, which is never what it's called for. But it's possible. But here, we can assume, maybe they also could train themselves, we don't know, but we can assume, let's assume it, that there was spontaneity. Seizei, yes, just a most natural, no barriers, no images. What should I say now? What should I ask him? How should I sound? How should I look? How should I come in? People report this, that there's concern with this. Some people mention that there seems to be a conditioning of worrying about how to appear when coming into the room, and they realize it hasn't anything to do with this particular room or this particular person, but the conditioning somehow is there from the past. If this is the case, as many people have reported, to just see that, as one sees the chairs and those beds in there, in that waiting line, the apprehension or the nervousness that comes up. It is a fact. And if it's seen as a fact, it doesn't need to rule one, even though the heart pounds faster or whatever the symptoms are. Let them be. They are not debilitating. They don't need to be. To understand that physical conditioning has a longer life than dropping a thought. The thought that has been there and may have been dropped has triggered something that has a longer life to run itself out, to come to quiet again. So here in this brief encounter, it's clear to both of them that there is no division. And Sozan puts it that way, you've tasted 3 cups of the best wine. Why do you say that your lips haven't even been moistened? When one has eaten or drunk and the lips are not moistened, it means no trace left. Trace is what happens when we commit an experience to memory. That may happen without our wanting to do it. It may register in the memory. The attachment to it, the returning to it, the sort of sucking on it, for years to come maybe, that is the problem. That becomes a problem. Why? Because then one is in conflict with what is happening right now. One is looking backward. As one person used to say, driving while looking in the rear view mirror. Eventually one crashes. And even if one doesn't crash, one doesn't see all that's around one, inside the car. And the landscape, the weather, the people walking by and across the street, one better see those. The reason the Koan was picked is to talk today a little bit about poverty. We've already talked about poverty a couple of times in connection with people who are struck by famine. Certainly one person asked in the meeting, and maybe on other people's minds, that's why I bring it up here. One person asked, I understand from what you said during the talk that above all what is needed is clarity of mind in an individual human being. And somehow or other this may or may not affect the problems of the world. It may, or it may not, but that, I understand, is of utmost importance. That is clear, said this person. And then the next question was, is that in contradiction to working in a group that tries to alleviate hunger in a famine-struck, drought-struck area? Why should it be in contradiction to that? If the clarity operates in the group too, if one doesn't get caught up in all kinds of group dynamics which may not be clear at all, which may be power dynamics or goodness knows what. It has to be seen. One has to test it out, examine it, watch it carefully, and not be carried away by the ideal goal of the group, that sort of justifies any kind of means within the group. One has to watch, be careful. And if oneself enters the group in confusion, one adds confusion to the group. That's so clear. And if the group is confused, how can it really help? Then it only adds confusion to the world situation. It is the world situation. Confusion. Utter confusion. And so little clarity. So wherever one works, can things become clear within and without? Whether one works here or there in a hunger relief group or in an office. So this poverty we wanted to look at has so many meanings. The word poverty, it could refer poverty and destitution, refer to people who have maybe only one meal a day or less than a meal a day to eat, maybe no meal in weeks, no shelter. In a hot country one doesn't need shelter, but I just recently heard over radio, if I remember it correctly, that the mayor of a large city requested that some existing large hall be made available for the people this winter who have no shelter, and they numbered in the thousands. Doesn't need to go far away to find poverty, no matter how much we like to talk ourselves into being the richest country in the world. There's poverty here too, and destitution. Not having enough to eat, no shelter, no warmth, maybe not adequate clothing, adequate education. And destitution, meaning, I didn't look the word up. It sounds like a certain hopelessness of change or of betterment, of an improvement. Maybe a lack of energy engendered by this poverty to take care of oneself. Then there's another meaning to poverty, which is a feeling of inner poverty, which cuts through all classes, from the poorest to the richest, sometimes maybe stronger in the richest people, in the affluent, in those who have lots of things, and continue to accumulate more things because out of a feeling of inner poverty, inner emptiness, and an inner abyss which no amount of acquisitions can fill. It's always there again. Because the human mind and organism has a way of getting used to everything. It's sort of a built-in mechanism, getting used to it and therefore needing more. More things, more people, more stimulation, new ideals, more power. Power and then more power. This coming out of this sense of inner poverty, or inner emptiness we've called it, which any one of us doing this work, sitting on the mat particularly, over a longer period of time as we're doing, comes in touch with this inner emptiness. It's inescapable. One may do as one does in one's daily life, immediately fill it up or escape from it in thought and fantasy. Think of the things one will do when one gets out. Or just drift and dream. Anything not to face this abyss within oneself. Can give it many names, a feeling of insufficiency, lack, poverty. We're using poverty right now, inner poverty. And it has nothing to do with the environment one lives in, which may be anything but poor. One may have all the food one can eat. And as several people have reported and are always reporting in retreat, eating time becomes a time in which one tries to stuff this abyss with food. It can become very clear that this is what one is doing when one is overeating. Trying to put something into this gaping hole inside. But apart from retreat, there's this always wanting something. Something more love, more relationship or different relationship with a new person, more excitement, more stimulation of the senses. No matter what sense, a sense of seeing or hearing, tasting, feeling. And since there is this mechanism in the physical organism of getting used to stimulation, the level of it, there is this need for the more, as long as this inner poverty nags and agonizes. To see that and to watch it as we live, so what is unconscious and compulsive becomes irradiated with light and attention, and therefore doesn't run us compulsively. It may not drop away immediately, but a first glimpse has been taken into something that has been dark and habitual, and therefore dangerous and destructive of relationship. These things aren't said to be negative about human beings. Nobody has mentioned or said this, but sometimes one hears such a criticism. You're so negative about human beings, why don't you say something about the goodness in human beings? Goodness needs not to be talked about, it speaks for itself. And it is so rare among all of us, because all of these other things seem to overlay it, want their fill, want to run on their tracks. One of them being lust or need for power, which starts already in the little children, maybe coming face to face with the power of the parents imposed upon them to their dismay and dislike, and then the revenge for it, also seeking power over the parents, over sisters, brothers, and playmates. It starts so early, it's amazing. One doesn't know whether it would start if parents were more aware of what one does unawares to a child. And with this, I don't advocate letting the child run wild, do what he or she likes, which may be destructive, not knowingly destructive, but destructive. But so often it has nothing to do with that. It's just that one does not want this child to run one. Parents put it that way. You're not going to tell me what to do, but I'm going to tell you what to do. And it's an irrational thing. It is a battle repeated, which one had to put up with when one was little. And now this thing comes out and repeats itself. Gets its closure, which never closes. Wants its closure, but it never. None of these compulsive patterns are resolvable. They keep on running unless there is insight into them. It's the only way to break them up. So this need, yearning or lust for power and the holding on to it, power over oneself or power over others, One may have a position where one has some supervisory functions, but can one leave it with the function, strictly with the function? Or is there immediately the getting something out of it for oneself? One has to see that. If one doesn't see it, one exerts this power in agonizing ways, in inflammatory ways to oneself and others, in hurting ways. And it strengthens the sense of self, which one at other times wants to weaken. We're so contradictory. We're so much smart from this sense of self, but the power we don't want to let go of. It's so pleasurable. It's so meaningful. It fills this sense of poverty so that it doesn't ache all the time. It's an escape. So whatever function one has at work or in the family, let's look at that. Day in and day out, is one really just fulfilling the function, or is there something extra in it for me that I need to feel I'm somebody? Or just the pleasure of power? Not to dismiss it, I'm not this way, I hate it. To look, it has to be looked at. And not just once and for all, it has to be looked at all the time if one is in such a position. And we all are, in some way or other, in such a position. Because we're all related, unless we live like recluses, we're related to someone else, we're living with someone else. Maybe not, but then we're working with someone else. And just two people living together, the friction and the tension between two people is usually on this level of who is going to win, who is going to have the power. You may express it simpler or more to the point as you watch. But watch it. Whether one really needs it at all. One thinks one needs it, it's habitual. I can't let him or her win all the time. I have to win once. Why? What is winning? And if I don't have to, maybe he doesn't have to either. Maybe the thing will dissolve like sugar in hot water. But one has to make a start, and one can't wait for the other one to make the start. It may never happen. It may never happen in oneself if one doesn't see the seriousness of this problem of investing and being invested in power in order not to face inner emptiness, inner poverty, feeling of inner helplessness that we've all grown up with and we've never grown out of. We've only overlaid it and escaped from it. And here in a retreat, this opens up. And then what does one do? Isn't the first thing to do nothing, but to let for one time this whole thing reveal itself, operate, ache fully, without taking any remedy? To investigate, to find out about it. The running away from it is not the finding out. What is it? If I don't fill it, if all my habitual escapes come to light and are rejected, not repressed, but rejected, I don't want to escape anymore. I want to find out. seems to be the innermost core is emptiness, poverty, insufficiency. Call it what you will. The thing is there if you don't run away. And to be that without a name, without knowing it, because you don't know it and you can't know it. It has to be felt, lived, experienced, without any division. Something happens if this can happen, this non-division. There's no running away, this total openness and vulnerability to whatever this may bring, this whole, this... Yeah, no more words are necessary, I've said it enough. You know, this is the most marvelous thing, that we're free to do anything or not to do anything. If we really see, yeah, this is what needs to be done, or not be done. Fear is no hindrance, because fear is already running. If you observe fear, fear is already away. Several people have reported this, that when one was really with a pain, then the fear was gone. And the pain wasn't the same, because the fear increases or complicates the pain, makes it unbearable. And then there's still another meaning to the word poverty. And it is how this man uses it in this story, saying, I'm poor and destitute. Can you help me? It's this kind of poverty that may come into being when the mind is done escaping, is finished with escaping, because escape is seen, it's irradiated with attention and rejected. Any kind of escape, all of the kinds we've listed, into power trips, games, attachments, clinging to this, clinging to that identity, being this, becoming that, fantasies of what one will be in the future, all of this being escape away from emptiness. When the mind understands this, and it is open to understanding. One can understand it intellectually, one can understand it immediately. Then the mind quiets down. It doesn't need to be forced into stillness by any kind of imposed discipline. It becomes quiet because it sees this escape and that escape is just escape, movement away, not to the point to which I need to get, where I need to be. That's clear. It's not enforced or imposed. It's what one needs to do. One has no choice. Then the mind becomes still, empty of all its devices and stratagems. Games, as one person put it. Endless games. In that stillness, it has nothing, wants nothing, expects nothing, and is nothing. And it may dawn that there is no division between me and this whole world. Sun and the moon and the stars and this marvelous lake, this whole earth, and all the people. This is a poverty which needs no help. No handouts. It's a poverty which is the seedbed of love, the womb of love, compassion. Not to get it from here and demand it from there, but it's there. It spreads on its own, without any ownership. And without leaving a trace. When the trace is left, it means I've done that. I'm pretty good. I'm terrific. And immediately, that kind of poverty is blown. One thinks one is rich, but it's only the richness of memories and ideas and roles. Which never satisfied, always has to be more and new and other and different. In some poem, I don't use the translation here, it's not appropriate. It says he has no means of livelihood. No means of livelihood, yet has all the riches. Or holds his own with the richest. So often in our over-concern with livelihood, with the means of livelihood, it falls into a real trap and cannot be in touch with what's actually there. Too busy to earn a living. And if one is entrapped in it, then it has to be more, better position, more money, more things, more obligations, more responsibilities. And no time to listen, to look, to sit, and to love. So here in sitting, attending, listening inwardly as well as outwardly, they are not two different directions. Questioning everything. Questioning who or mu, not as a means to an end, to a goal, but as this expression of not knowing. Can it happen in the midst of utter poverty, emptiness? No matter how painful or joyful. We will end here for today.